کنفرانس‌های بین‌المللی با شرکت شخصیت‌های سیاسی، تحلیلگران، متخصصان و پارلمانترها درباره رویارویی مقاومت و قیام مردم ایران با دیکتاتوری آخوندی.
کنفرانس سیاست اروپا در قبال ایران. سخنرانی دکتر آلخو ویدال کوادراس، رئیس کمیته بین المللی در جستجوی عدالت.
It's the final session. I know it's been a long day, and we just heard about the US policy on Iran, and now it's time to talk about the European policy on Iran. Iran continues to take hostages, European citizens as hostages, and use them as bargaining chips to enforce their will on sovereign states in Europe. The nuclear issue has not been resolved, and Iran continues to support, finance, and export terrorism globally. So what can we do? And why are the European countries not changing their policies towards Iran? What does it take? More nationwide uprisings? An organized opposition, perhaps? So here we have a distinguished panelist. I want to welcome you all to have this discussion with us and to hear your perspectives on this issue. And I will start by inviting you, Dr. Alkhou Vydal Quadras. You've been Vice President of the European Parliament. You're an old friend to the Free Iran community. You've seen a lot of uprisings, and you've seen that there hasn't been much change in the European policy towards Iran. What does it take? Is it time now?
دکتر آلخو ویدال کوادراس، رئیس کمیته بین‌المللی در جستجوی عدالت. سیاست اتحادیه اروپا طی چند دهه در رابطه با رژیم ایران بر دو سراب استوار بوده است. توهم اول این که میانه‌روهایی در رژیم ایران وجود دارد. دومین توهم استمالت و مذاکره و امتیاز دادن به چنین رژیمی است. اثبات شده است که این دو توهم به نحو رقت‌انگیزی شکست خورده‌اند.
سفرهای خانم رجبی به پارلمان اروپا موفقیت بزرگی بوده. سالن‌های بزرگ مملو از افراد با ده‌ها نماینده که همگی از خانم رجبی حمایت می‌کنند. از این رو اکثریت پارلمان همواره بسیار فعال و بسیار متعهد به حمایت از مقاومت ایران، شورای ملی مقاومت ایران و سازمان مجاهدین بوده است.
Well, hopefully. But the first thing I want to do, of course, is to thank the invitation to participate in this distinguished panel, European panel. Second thing I want to do is to congratulate you for the successful outcome of the judiciary decision in Paris, cancelling the ban of the French government, of the prefecture of Paris, about the rally of the Iranian resistance. This victory, because it's indeed a victory, could be considered as a small victory. But in the context that we work, fighting the Iranian totalitarian regime, no victory is small. And these small victories announce the final victory that will be the end of this evil regime and the arrival of freedom and democracy to Iran. And this victory has been won because a decision of the judiciary. And I want to underline it, because when we refer to the EU, the European Union policy in relation to Iranian regime, we must be very careful, because the European Union, the institutional framework of the European Union is very complex, and not all institutions have the same policy. So this is a point I would like you to understand, because we cannot say the European Union policy in relation to Iran, because the European Union has the three classical powers. We have an executive power, we have legislative power, and we have a judiciary. And not all three institutions behave equally in relation to the Iranian regime. Who is the executive power in the European Union? So, for the sake of the argument, I will, even if it's not very correct, but I will join together Commission and Council as executive in the European Union. And what has been the policy of this executive power of the European Union for decades in relation to the Iranian regime? It has been a policy dominated by two mirages. One mirage is there are moderates in the Iranian regime, and we must engage with the moderates, and we must help the moderates. This is the first illusion, let's say. And then there is a second illusion. With such a regime, let's try to appease them, let's try to negotiate, to have a dialogue, to make concessions, to calm them down, and to try to live with them. Well, these two illusions have proved completely false, both of them. They have failed miserably. There are no moderates. Of course, there are different families, as in any dictatorship. There are different families that fight for power and influence and to loot the budget, but at the end they are all the same. And if this policy have failed for decades, the question is why they keep doing the same thing 1 year after 1 year if it does not work. Well, I have known and I've dealt with different commissions and different high representatives of the EU for foreign policy and common security policy along my 15 years as Vice President of the European Parliament. Javier Solana was the first High Representative, then Catherine Ashton, then Federica Mogherini, and today my compatriot Josep Borrell. And I've been dealing with the four of them. And me and other members of parliament have discussed with all of them about the policy in relation to the Iranian regime, the Iranian theocracy. And I must say, I say it with sorrow, that they are deaf and blind to evidence. Absolutely. It's a very strange phenomenon because, as I say, the four of them have kept the same policy in spite of their absolute failure. And at the end, the conclusion is that this policy is the result of conception of policy which refuses to take any risk. So, the commissioners and the national governments that sit in the council and the high representatives and all the staff of advisors and civil servants in the union, they hate risk. And they do not realize that to defeat tyranny, to defeat dictatorships, to defeat aggressive, evil powers in this world, it is impossible to do it without risk. The MEK, the NCRI, take risks every day. They risk their lives every day. Here and mostly in Iran. But in the European Commission, the member states in the European Council refuse absolutely to take any risk. And they do not realize that refusing risks, they increase risk every year. Let's go to Parliament. What is the policy of the Parliament? That's a completely different scene. In Parliament, I mean the European Parliament, there is, since many years, an intergroup called Friends of Free Iran that today is co-chaired by a Spanish member called Javier Zarzalejos and a member from Slovenia called Milan Zver. This intergroup, Friends of Free Iran, has been working in Parliament for more than 20 years and organizes events, has invited Mrs. Rajavi more than 12 or 14 times to the Parliament to have hearings with the different groups, sometimes organized by Friends of Free Iran itself. Always these visits of Mrs. Rajavi to the Parliament have been a great success. Big room packed with people, with dozens of members, all supporting Mrs. Rajavi. Many resolutions of the Parliament, many statements condemning the regime and asking for respect for human rights, condemning executions. So, Parliament, a majority of the Parliament, has always been extremely active and extremely committed, supporting the Iranian resistance, the NCRI, and the MEK. So, as you see, an attitude that has nothing to do with the Commission and the Council. Completely different, I would say not only different, but opposite, because on one side, the Council and the Commission make the life of the mullahs easy, and in Parliament, on the contrary, strong support to the Iranian resistance, to the NCRI, and to the MEK. And what about the judiciary? Well, the judiciary, of course, is a cold, serene, slow power. But when it has acted, it has been in the good direction. For instance, in the case of the blacklisting of the MEK and the NCRI, the European Court of Justice failed that these organizations should be delisted. And I lived it personally because I attended one of the hearings of the court. And it was very impressive to see the 28 because at that time the UK was a member. So there were 28 judges. And you saw all these judges with these beautiful robes, you know, gowns, and the council was there defending that the MEK should be in the blacklist. And of course, there were the lawyers of the MEK defending the MEK and say they should be delisted. Okay. They were exposing their arguments, and in a certain moment, the president of the European Court said to the lawyer of the council, "Have you any proof or any evidence that this organization has participated, has financed, or has in some way cooperated with terrorist action?" There was a silence in the courtroom. And the lawyer of the council said, "Yes, but it's reserved material." And then the president of the court said, "Anything that cannot be known by this court does not exist for this court." And then, you know, what was the final ruling? That MEK and Sierai were delisted from the European list. So that was my first point. Very different behavior, executive, legislative, and judiciary. And this different behavior is also present in member states, because in many member states' national parliaments, in France, in Germany, in Italy, in UK, when it was member state, today, of course, even if it's not member state, it's the same thing in relation to the MEK and to the NCRI, full support. In all these parliaments and others in Europe, there are very active democratic committees where there are many members of these parliaments that work for democracy and freedom in Iran, and that fight the Iranian regime. In France, for instance, le comité parlementaire pour l'Iran démocratique, and in many other parliaments, similar committees that are defending the Iranian resistance, and they adopt resolutions and statements and do action. And of course, Mrs. Rajavi has also visited many of these parliaments with a great welcome by the members and a great success. So this position of the legislative powers in Europe in support of the MEK is quite general. And then once this is clear that we cannot talk of a uniform or common policy because of the different behavior of the different institutions, let me say something. The governments of member states and the Commission, what I'm going to say, it's hard, but I have to say it. They are not only cowards, they are incompetent. Because now, after the assassination of Masha Amini, there have been a wave of protest in Iran, thousands of people in the streets, 750 killed in the streets, 30,000 arrested. In many European television at prime time, there were the news on the protest in Iran, and the regime was really weak internally. They were really on the verge of being defeated. And it was the opportunity for the Western democracies to do decisive action to combine the internal pressure of the Iranian people with pressure from outside, sanctions, closing of embassies, political pressure, blacklisting the Revolutionary Guards. And the combination of this pressure from inside and from outside undoubtedly would have most probably, it would be most probably the end of the regime. But the Western governments did nothing. And of course, the brave struggle of the Iranian people month after month. So that's what I say, that they are not only coward, our governments, in relation to the Iranian regime, but incompetent. And let me finish thanking you. Because sometimes when I attend these meetings, members of the Iranian resistance or expatriates, they come to me to thank what we do to support regime change in Iran. And I always say, no, don't thank me. There is nothing to thank me or my colleagues. We thank you because as Europeans, we thank you for your commitment to the universal values that we Europeans should defend inside and outside Europe. So nothing to thank to us. We thank you for your courage, for your resolve, for your determination, defending those values that we Europeans do not defend enough. Thank you. Thank you.